to use this newly created custom HTTP hook, in the auth page component here, I'll replace my existing logic to send a request here with the logic in my custom hook. So here, first of all, we can import this hook. We import use HTTP client from shared hooks HTTP hook. And then here we have to call use HTTP client, not when we want to send a request, but initially in this component, because keep in mind, this custom hook creates everything we need to send a request and then returns us, for example, a pointer at this send request function. And this is then the function we need to call to really send a request. So we can get rid of isLoading and the error state here, because this is now managed inside of the hook, and instead call use HTTP client like this. And then this returns us some data, so we can use object destructuring here to, for example, get access to isLoading, to the error, and also to send request, which is very important. Also to clear error, which we need to, well, clear an error. Now with that, if we scroll down, we got a couple of errors. Set isLoading does not exist anymore, and we don't need it anymore. It will be done all inside of the send request function, which is managed in our own hook. And instead of using fetch here, I will now call send request, pass my URL, but then actually not such an object here, but as a second argument, the HTTP method. So just post as a string as a second argument. The third argument, if we have a look at send request, should then actually be the body. So back in the auth component, let's grab this piece of data here and add this as a third argument here after post. And fourth argument then is our headers object. This now sends a valid request, hopefully, and send request also returns a promise. This, however, then already has our response data, and we don't need to manually parse it or check for the 400-ish status code. That is already done inside of our hook. Therefore, we don't set isLoading here, we don't set it here, and in the catch block, we also don't need to set an error in the end, because we're doing try catch already in our custom hook. So we don't need to do any try catching here at all. We can get rid of this, because everything will be handled by the custom hook. Here, we will just get back our response data in the end, or undefined if we do have an error. Now I don't care about the response data in this specific component, so I can actually just await and then log in thereafter. Now we have to be careful though with this logic. In the HTTP hook, I said we do have try catch, and we do, but in the catch block here, we're not returning any response. Instead, we're just doing nothing, which means automatically undefined gets returned. Hence, at the moment, if we do have an error in here, we'll actually still make it to this line here, which I don't want, of course. So a little improvement here actually should be that if we do have an error, yes, we set our error, but we then also throw the error again, so that the component that uses our hook has a chance of knowing that something went wrong. And therefore, set isLoading should be set here, and also here in the success case before we return the response data. So now I am again throwing an error here in the custom hook, in the function there. And so in our component, we want to re-add try catch, just to make sure that we don't always call auth login. So let's move that in here, catch any error here in the catch block, and call auth login only in the try block, so if we get no error. In the catch block, we do have an error, and well, here I don't need to do much with it though. We can log it, we can ignore it, because in the end, here in the catch block, I don't need to handle the error. We're doing all of that. We're setting our error state and so on, all in our custom hook. So this can be an empty catch block in the end. Alternatively, you could not use try catch here and use the good old then method on the promise instead and just omit a catch method. Now, similar logic for our other request here. There, I don't care about the response, but I want to send a request here. It is a post request, and the data is this data here. So I will pass this as a third argument, and then these headers as a fourth argument, just like this. That's now send request there. It is in try catch to handle any errors we're getting. We don't need to do anything of that here though. We just need to continue if we have no error, or do nothing if we do have an error. And in the error handler, we want to call clear error, this function we get from our custom hook, or we get rid of the error handler altogether. And in onClear, we just point at clear error, which is this function coming from our own hook. And with that, let's give it a try. Let's save that, go to authenticate, and maybe try logging in here. If I do that, see the spinner, and I get an error here. I got an error that abort controller is not a function. That makes sense because I do have this abort controller set up in a custom hook, but at the moment I never remove an abort controller from my array of abort controllers if a request completes. That's a little oversight from my side. Of course, we should do that. Once we have a response, we know that the request completed. So once we're here, after we parse the response body. So here I then want to go to my active HTTP requests and set current equal to active HTTP requests.current and filter out this specific controller that was responsible for this specific request. So here I want to filter all my request controllers and remove the request controller which I used for this request, which I do with this logic. This keeps every controller except for the controller which was used in this request. With that, we're not having any old request controller, which we then would try to use to cancel a request which is not on its way anymore. But in addition, the error actually also, of course, occurred because here I have abort controller.abort controller. The function is just named abort though. So we got an error because I was calling a function that doesn't exist, but this call shouldn't have happened in the first place, which is why adding this logic here also is important. We want to clear the abort controllers that belong to the request which just completed. But of course, we also want to fix this error down there and make sure I use abort and not abort controller as a function name or as a method name. So with this change now, we make sure we don't try to cancel a request which already completed. And therefore, if we test this again here, this looks way better. Now, let's also try signing up here. And let's first of all try this with credentials where we should get an error. This works. If I use valid credentials, this also works. And if I try signing up with invalid data, logging in with invalid data, I get an error and I only continue if I have valid inputs. So this is looking good to me. It looks like our custom hook is doing its job. And with that, we can continue and we can use this custom hook in our users component as well. Definitely feel free to try to implement it there on your own first. In the next lecture, we'll do it together.